And off we go. All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining this week's episode of Launch and Learn by Microverse. My name is Alvaro. I'm a full-time student currently enrolled on Microverse. And before I start, I would like to talk a bit about Microverse and the Launch and Learn. So first of all, Microverse. Microverse, it's a coding school where students from all around the world can enroll, and you learn coding by doing pair programming and being paired with another student from all around the world. One of the biggest advantages from Microverse is that you don't have to pay until you get a job, which it's also one of the things that Microverse helps you with. And with that said, Launch and Learn, it's our weekly talk where we bring guest speakers that share their professional experiences and journeys, and they also talk about topics like open source, pair programming, of course, and remote work. And with that said, I would like to present our guest speaker for this week, David Haney. David is an engineering manager at Stack Overflow. He practices servant leadership by solving problems and improving processes. Previously, he was a lead developer on Fanatics e-commerce platform, which hosts over 10,000 websites, including the NFL Shop, the official online shop for the NFL, and the NBA Store, the official NBA Store. In his spare time, he brews and drinks beer, plays video games and board games, and he also watches movies at old school one-screen theaters with his wife. And without further ado, it's with great pleasure that I leave the word to David. Thank you, David, for being with us.
Thank you, Alvaro. Can everybody hear me all right? Or at least Alvaro can hear me all right? Anything?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Perfect. Let me know if you can't in the chat. Paul says yes, so we should be good. Cool. Thank you, Alvaro, for introducing me and for having me, and to Ariel as well. I don't know if he's here, but for inviting me to talk. So I really appreciate that. And thank you all for coming. I know that this is a distributed group of people, so not everybody's in America, but for at least some people in here, myself included, it's 4th of July tomorrow. So I totally appreciate people taking time before the holiday to come and hear me blab for a little while. So I plan to do sort of an ad hoc talk, like an informal talk for about 30 to 40 minutes, talking about things like working remotely, how we do things at Stack Overflow, remote work, deploying code and automation, hiring and interviews, and getting a job in tech, even if it's not at Stack Overflow. So giving you my opinion on how to break out into the industry, get that first job, and or that better job if you already have a job and you want something better, and what I find useful and whatnot as a hiring manager. That'll probably take me 30 to 35 minutes, I'm guessing, and then I'm going to leave it open to Q&A, so feel free to ask questions. I see there's a Q&A tab. I'm guessing that Alvaro is going to moderate that, hopefully. Thank you in advance if you are.
Yes.
Cool, perfect, and I'll definitely give you straight answers to anything you have. Don't be shy. Feel free to ask me anything at all that you'd like to. I love my job and I like what I do, and I feel very lucky to be where I am in life, but I don't drink any Kool-Aid. I'm not part of a cult as far as I know, and I'm not brainwashed, so I'll give you very honest answers about pretty much anything you want to ask about myself, or your career or potential career, your learnings, or what you want to do or be or become in the industry and how to get there. So feel free to ask. You'll never know if you don't ask. And final statement there is the advice is worth price charged, as to say, it's just one opinion from a guy like me, so take it as you like it, and if you don't agree with it, that's totally normal and expected most of the time. So with that, let's talk about the Stack Overflow operating system. So I'm an engineering manager at Stack Overflow. If you don't know what Stack Overflow is, then you may or may not be in a very small minority of developers. Stack Overflow is a question and answer website that hosts over 100 million users per month. As we speak right now, there's 114,000 people on the site, although it'll probably drop off a bit tomorrow with America stepping out to be on vacation. It's a very popular site, full of questions and answers. We're actually going through an interesting time right now. We work remotely completely. We have some people in office, but we're a remote work environment, and I'm going to talk about that. But we are coming to a precipice where we've realized that I don't know if many of you have tried to ask questions on Stack Overflow, but it can be a very intimidating and hostile first experience and environment to get into and to become a part of. And it's a hard community to join, and that's sort of by design of the people that are currently what I would call power users in it, and we've identified that as a major issue, and that's something that we're working very strongly towards fixing this year. So we have a group called the Welcome Wagon that's working towards making it a more inviting and encouraging place and providing more guidance. We don't tell you the rules, and then when you get the rules wrong, people basically, they crap on you for it, and then that leaves you with a sour experience. So we're aware of that. We're sorry for that. That's something that we're definitely improving, and if you have any feedback on it, I'd also be happy to talk about that as well. So Stack Overflow, question and answer platform. I've been there about 4 years. I've been a manager for 3. I joined as a developer in 2014. It's a great job, best job I've ever had, but like I said, not brainwashed, just really enjoy it. We pretty much work remotely, as you all do with Microverse. I know that Microverse is a remote kind of coding school, and I think that's an awesome thing. Working remotely is a wonderful way to promote diversity and to get really great perspectives and work with people from all over the world without having to travel a lot. And it's a pretty wonderful experience to have, and I feel lucky to have it at Stack Overflow as well. Working remotely is not easy, as you've probably learned doing the Microverse schooling. The work world is not any easier. It's hard to coordinate. It's hard to be effective, and that's something that you have to work really actively on. And also, you have to kind of start with a good culture from the top down of remote work. So at Stack Overflow, we do have offices. We have one in New York and we have one in London. But even though you might work out of an office if you happen to live in New York or London, everybody works remotely. And so what that means is whether you work in the office or you work where I work, which is Florida, we issue you a webcam and a headset like this one, although mine's almost broken. I have a new one coming. And make sure that all the meetings that you have and all the tools that you use are remote friendly, so that there aren't those hallway conversations where you end up not in the know because 2 people passing in the office talked about something and you never had a chance to hear it. If anybody's ever been on a conference call, if you've had a job, it could be not in programming, it could be in a prior life or prior career path, or a current career path if you're into programming part-time or full-time. You might have had that experience where you're on the call and there's a room of like 12 people talking, and it's very clear that conference, the remote callers are an afterthought. Like, it's really hard to hear and nobody's, giving time for you to talk, and it's totally a waste of time, really frustrating. That's remote work kind of done badly. So that leaves you kind of tuned out and not paying attention to the meeting. And then at the end, you don't know what's going on. And the worst thing is, because you kind of tuned out and can't hear it, if there's a long awkward pause of silence, you wonder if they've called out your name, and if you if you missed your cue to say something, and then you have to apologize and repeat yourself. So that's kind of what remote work done badly looks like. What remote work done well looks like is issuing everybody the tools to be remote. So like I said, the webcam, the headset, a good internet connection. Stack Overflow pays for the internet connection of its employees. The key there is to make sure that everybody's on the same playing field. We all talk over webcam and meetings like this, except the tool that we happen to use is Google Hangouts or Google Meet. But there are other competitive tools like Zoom that work just as well. The key to good remote work is definitely to be overly communicative. So this can be hard for introverted people, but you need to, when you're in an office, the manager, such as myself, can walk around and see what you're doing. When you're in your home working, it's totally possible that you sign on and then go watch Netflix for 2 hours and not actually do any work. So, and that's, sometimes that's going to happen, honestly, and that's okay as long as you're getting your work done. But the key to building trust with your team and making sure that your team is really effective and good at working remotely is to be overly communicative and verbose about what you are doing. So, I usually start my day by signing in and saying hello in a couple of chat rooms. We use Slack and a couple other pieces of software like email, Google Hangouts, like I talked about. So I'll say hello in all the relevant places and good morning. I'll kind of give people a quick 1-sentence update on what I've been doing and what I'm working on. I'll, proceed to go to a bunch of meetings, because that's what you do as a manager. In case anybody's curious about being a manager, you're going to end up going to a lot of meetings all day, every day. And as I kind of step out for things, like maybe I step out to make a coffee, I'll let people know. If I step out to have lunch, I'll let people know that I'll be back in an hour. If I step out to go to the gym and exercise, which I do a couple times a week usually, I will let them know that I'll be back in 45 minutes, kind of thing. These are things you may not do in an office, right? Like when you're working in an office, you might just leave for lunch. You might just, go make a coffee. You might just go to the gym. And those things are kind of taken for granted in that culture, because people can see that you're not there when they walk by your desk or your cubicle. But that's not true for remote. because you're not always face to face. So it's definitely important to be overly explicit about what you're doing and when. All meetings, the next thing you need to do is make sure that you avoid that conference call situation that I talked about earlier. So all meetings should be held online. Just like this. This format that we're doing on, I think it's called Big Marker, actually allows all of us to kind of level the playing field and talk across the world. Like, I don't know where everybody's located, but there's probably a bunch of people here from different parts of the world that aren't America, and that's awesome. This wouldn't go nearly as well if you had to call a 1-800 number. So yeah, so Josh is from Tokyo. That's awesome. It's also probably like midnight there. So thank you for staying up to, 1 a.m. So thank you for staying up to listen to me blab. Totally appreciate it, Josh. That's my point. Josh isn't going to have the opportunity to have this kind of conversation if he has to call a 1-800 number and sit on a conference call and try and understand what the heck I'm saying through mumbled voices and people talking over each other and stuff. So a big part of being remote successfully is to host every meeting online. We use Google Hangouts for that. It's a great tool. There are other tools, like I said, they're fine. You just need a tool that lets you get together in a room like this where you can all share your screens and talk. And that's a really useful thing. We do that all the time. Virtually all of my meetings are done in like a Google Hangout. We also have a couple of open rooms that are just kind of like social rooms, because an important part of remote work is getting that social contact that you get in an office. So, when you work in an office with people, you can go to lunch together, you can grab a coffee, you can grab a beer after work if you're into drinking. You can't do that remotely. So, we have a couple of social rooms. One's called the coffee bar, where you can just sign in and hang out on video with a coffee and talk to people if anybody's in there, which usually 1 or 2 people are, kind of casually, and just catch up on things and socialize, and that's important too. So providing those social experiences in an online format is like the essential part of remote work. And like I said, headsets and webcams are key. Being able to see people face to face is way more important than just hearing voices, so having a webcam is key. I'm going to kind of interject with questions, Q&As as I go, probably, just because, I don't know, I feel like if you ask me questions now and answer them 30 minutes from now, that's no longer relevant. So ad hoc, Josh asks, what application do you use to host the coffee bar? That's also Google Hangouts. We just set up a meeting room called Coffee Lounge, and it's kind of a static room that always exists. And basically you can jump in there, and anybody else who's also jumped in there will meet up and chat. So yeah, so working remotely, hopefully I kind of got the key points across. I think to be effective, it's got to be a top-down thing from the company. Our philosophy is if one employee is remote, then everybody has to be remote. If only one group is remote, then it actually builds, like, let's say only engineering is remote and everybody else, like sales and marketing, has to work on site. Well, that creates like some frustration and some dysfunction where people are jealous. Like, how come they get to work from home, in their underwear all day, and we have to come into the office and do the commute and all that? So I think to do it effectively, you need to find a company that does remote from the top down all the way through. You need to host all your meetings online. And not have those hallway conversations. You need to make sure that everybody's remote by issuing headsets and webcams, and you need to make sure that anyone can access any meeting. Again, that there aren't any hallway conversations.
We have a question from Nicole.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so Nicole asks, well, she describes that it's kind of difficult when you're doing remote work to ask for mentorship from your manager or senior when you're not physically there. And she asked, what are some suggestions you have for companies and for junior developers to manage this issue, particularly the greater time investment needed for junior developers when you're doing it remotely and you don't have the presence of a coworker that can help you?
That's a good question. It's a tough question. I usually find that kind of situation that you were in there, Nicole, is part of the culture of the company. You had an internship where you were very junior, but they weren't making time for you remotely to learn stuff and to kind of train up. And I think that's a failure on the company's part and not really a failure on your part. I wouldn't really give you specific advice other than to be proactive. I think you probably were. I don't know you, of course, but I'm guessing that you were proactive and tried to reach out and ask for help. And they basically came back with, silence, or they weren't able to find time. We do a remote internship as well. That's a pitch, I guess. It's going to be starting this year in September. So if you're interested, definitely visit our website. And we've got a work here page that will have the internship up the next week or two. and highly recommend that you apply if interested. And the reason I bring that up is not just to pitch it, but the fact that we do it differently. If you join us as a junior or as a, whether you're a new hire who's experienced or a junior or an intern, we assign you a dedicated mentor from the team. And that mentor's only job for the first 6 weeks is to work with you side by side, be on calls with you, on video with you, do peer coding, that kind of stuff. Yeah, so Nicole follows up and says they were offering time, but it was a small company and they had limited time, money, and resources. That's the nature of that company. You had an experience that wasn't optimal, I think. One thing you can do is when you're looking for future remote work is you can kind of vet the company through the interview process. Interviews are both ways, right? Like a lot of people train you up on how to do an interview, how to pass an interview, how to answer the questions, but you have to remember that you're also interviewing the company as much as they're interviewing you. And so to Nicole and others in their situation, I would say that you should definitely, vet the company in the interview. Ask them about remote work. Ask them about how they ensure that people are successful remotely. Ask them about mentoring and the time they dedicate to that. That small company that she worked for probably wasn't set up for remote work and was kind of winging it, or it was one of their first experiences. And so you had an unfortunately frustrating experience. But I think it's on the company and less on the junior to dedicate the time and resources to make sure that you are successful. And I think they did a disservice to you, not to bash them, of course. Everybody's human and we make mistakes. But my personal take is they did a disservice to you by offering sort of a, pardon my language, a half-assed experience in that regard. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question. So, sorry, go ahead, Alvaro.
Oh yeah. Well, I wanted to ask. It's like a two-part question. So the first thing would be, how important do you think as a remote worker is to have some sort of engagement activities for the whole team, where I don't know, some sort of thing or activity or even chat where you can know a bit more about your coworkers, or like I said, keep engaged. We've heard people that do remote work, they have like different opinions about it. And if you feel positive about these kind of engagement activities, do you guys have some sort of engagement activities for the whole team?
Yeah, that's a good question also. Yeah, it's really important to cultivate the sort of social interactions and the casual friendships and conversations, especially remotely, because like I said, you can't do it like you would in the office. You can't all go to, I don't know, the bowling alley or something as a team building exercise because, for Josh, the bowling alley is in Tokyo, and for me, it's in Florida, and good luck with that. So, my answer to that is it's important to be deliberate about building teams' trust and like relationships. We do it a couple of ways. One way we do it is to just ask, if we finish a meeting early, we get somebody to ask a silly question. So a silly question it's just a get to know you question. It could be like, what was your first pet? And what was its name, or like, what's the favorite movie you've seen in the last year, or what do you do in your spare time? Anything to kind of get to know each other a little bit is helpful. Another thing is, although remote work is totally doable, I've been doing it for 4 years pretty successfully, and you can be successful at it. Nothing beats, like when it comes down to it, nothing beats face-to-face interaction. And so one thing that our company also does is host an annual meetup. Once a year, we get together for a week in a city somewhere in the world, fly everybody out, and we host a couple of meetings and social events. Last time it was in Philadelphia, and we did things like went bowling, ironically, and a few other things, just to get to know people and interact, because it's really hard to replace that in-person interaction and team building. And definitely the feedback I get from that a lot of the time is that people feel good about working at Stack Overflow, but then when they go to a meetup and meet people in person, they feel really comfortable and really like they're part of the team. It sort of is the final touch. So it's definitely important to try and cultivate like in-person experiences as much as possible, even in a fully remote environment.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. I want to talk a bit about how we deploy code at Stack Overflow. One thing you can vet when you go for interviews is how the environments are set up at the workplace and how they deploy to production. I get asked this a lot in interviews. Most devs want to know how we deploy code and how often. So the answer is we deploy to production anywhere from 1 to 15 times a day. We have 2 environments. One's called dev and one's called prod. We don't have a QA environment, but quite honestly, we probably should. And that's something we're working towards. But just sort of like the experience Nicole had, it's limited money and resources. We just are getting to it. It's a thing we need, but don't yet have budget for. We've got a lot of automation tools built. So One thing is called TeamCity. There are many software pieces kind of like it, but what it does is it contacts your source control. So we use GitHub Enterprise. Everybody pushes code to GitHub. Hopefully you're all fairly familiar with that. It's just like that, but it's a version of it hosted only for your organization privately. So we commit to the enterprise version of GitHub for Stack Overflow. And then when we want to build, we go into TeamCity and we press build to production. And it pulls the source code from GitHub and it runs a couple of tests, and then it talks to the load balancer because we have multiple web servers behind one load balancer. It synchronizes with the load balancer, pulls out server 1, updates the code, makes sure it's working, puts it back in the pool, pulls out server 2, makes sure it's working, puts it back in the pool. Does this all the way through the 9 servers. Takes about 4 minutes total, and the more human factor you cancel out, the less error you can make. So because it's automated to one click, it very rarely goes wrong because nobody forgets to do anything like configure a server or whatever. It's totally automated. So one click deploy is very key to getting things out the door effectively and quickly. That's something you can ask about in interviews is, how do you deploy to production? Do you have automation? What kind of automation do you have? We also have some etiquette around it. So when anybody can kind of commit code, there's a danger there. When you're releasing so much, anybody's code could go live same day, and so there's some etiquette around not breaking the build, and that comes sort of in the format of working out of feature branches. So with Git, you can branch out your features and not merge them to master until you've tested them and made sure they're good, or even just working on it locally and not pushing it up to the remote branch repo until or the remote master repo, pardon me, until it's ready, that kind of thing. And the other thing we do is you can't leave your code hanging. So if you commit anything to dev, then before you leave for the end of the day, you need to build it out to production to make sure it works. Because otherwise what happens is, given our remote environment, which has people all over the world, Dean's going to start his day at 5 a.m. my time because he's over in London. And he's going to build out the code that I committed last night, and it's going to explode, and I broke the build, except I'm not going to wake up for another 3 or 4 hours, maybe 5 hours. So he, is left hanging trying to figure out my code and make sure nothing's broken and roll it back. And so we just try to avoid that whole situation by enforcing that if you commit code during the day, you build it out to production before you leave for the day. Any questions on that, automation and stuff? If there are, I'll catch up with them. No big deal.
Yeah, doesn't to be anything. Yeah.
Cool. I want to talk a bit about hiring and interviews. So how do you get a remote job, right? I think that's probably what most of you are interested in. That's definitely what I'm interested in. I think once you work remotely, you kind of get spoiled by the freedom of it and don't necessarily want to get in your car and dress up and go to the office every day. So at Stack Overflow, when we hire, we do a pretty thorough process. We have 7 interviews total. So from the moment you apply, the potential interviews you go through are a phone screen, a code screen, which is a basic can you code test, doing a somewhat simple algorithm, but challenging enough that it kind of proves that you have the skills. Then we do 2 other coding interviews. One's called the hard interview, which we do an advanced algorithm and see if you can solve it. And the other one's an architecture interview where you design a small system. Then we do a PM interview where you talk to PMs. They make sure that you have product sense because developing is about so much more than just code, right? It's about understanding the product, having good ideas, and being able to talk with humans about technical things in a way that they understand. If you get through all that, you interview with your potential manager and you interview with the CTO of the company. If you get through all of that, we'll extend you an offer. Why do we do that? We're in a unique situation. I'm not saying that 7 interviews is a good idea for a lot of companies. We're in a unique at all. It takes 2 or 3 weeks. It's very frustrating for a lot of people. It's also quite verbose. The reason we do that is we are fairly, for lack of a better term, famous in tech space, and we get a ton of applicants to jobs. And so we use this very thorough process to kind of weed out people and make sure that whoever gets through is exceptional in their field. We don't do those 7 interviews for the internship program that I mentioned earlier, and I'll talk a bit about at the end as well. To be clear, we do a different set of interviews for that are a little more geared towards people entering the field. But if you're going for a full-time job, that's sort of the 7-step process that we do. We don't like to ask, one thing to think about when you're applying for a job is what kinds of questions they ask you in the interview. I would say you should always try to work somewhere where code is part of the interview process. I've worked a couple of jobs where they didn't code test, and the result of that is that a lot of people who can't code get through because they're smooth talkers. And that's all good and well until you have to work there with them on a team and you figure out that you're one of the only 2 or 3 people that know how to code out of a group of 6, but you've got 6 people's worth of work to do. and that means that your life is going to be pretty crummy. So I think that it's really important to work somewhere where they test code, as part of the interview, so that you can prove that you're able to do the job, but also so that the people you work with have also passed through that gate, which means that they know how to code as well, and they'll pull their own weight as well more often than not. The other thing is what kinds of questions they ask. I think it's really useless to ask questions like Google used to, like why are manhole covers round, that sort of thing. That doesn't matter. It's never going to come up for any of us because we're not, infrastructure engineers for the city. And it's supposed to be like creative and aha and figure out the secret answer type things, but they're just not, they don't test anything other than you've had the luxury of thinking about stupid questions in advance. And I think that's not fair. I think it's a really crappy way to interview people, and I think it's not relevant. So the questions that we ask are strictly related to what you would be doing at work. So I mentioned a code screen. Well, that algorithm is going to be a typical algorithm you'd write to solve, a problem we have at work. The hard interview is going to be a more difficult part of a project that you would work on here. The architecture interview is going to be basically being handed a feature and saying, how would you build it? Because guess what? If you work here, you're going to be handed features and asked to build it. So we try to keep stuff directly relevant and simulate working with us full time so that you get to see if the person is able to do the work that's required. So I think it's really important in interviews to, like I said, make sure you take it both ways. They're interviewing you and you're interviewing them, and you should vet the company and make sure that you like the questions being asked, they seem relevant, they're code testing, and also that they are setting you up for success if you're working remotely by asking them about how they make sure that remote developers are successful. Cool. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about maybe the last 10 minutes or so about getting a job in technology. So whether or not you end up working at Stack Overflow, irrelevant. But I think everybody here is probably striving for either a job, their first major job in technology, or perhaps a better job in technology, right? We always want to improve ourselves, and there's always something else out there. So as a manager, I've hired many people. I've fired a few people, unfortunately. It happens. I've definitely done probably 100 interviews in the last 2 years or more. And I want to talk a bit about what I think makes for a good and promising looking candidate on paper and in the interview. And then I've got a question that says, it's from Paul, says, you say your interview process filters out for only the exceptional applicants. Can a junior dev ever be exceptional assuming you hire juniors? Yes. We figured out that our interview process is definitely geared towards seniors, and that was causing some issues for us in terms of diversity and inclusion, particularly because we tended to get people who are senior developers who tend to usually be white dudes applying and succeeding through the process. And so the internship program is kind of the junior path into the company, which helps us kind of work through those issues with the 7-step interview process. Our first run of it was 2 years ago, and 2 candidates made it through, named Jisoo and Ian. They absolutely kicked butt. They did a great job in the interview process, and then we had originally only planned to do the internship for 4 months, but at the end extended full-time offers to both of them. And they're still both working here and very successfully. Jisoo is an absolute dynamo. One of the smartest people I've ever met, who definitely is almost ahead of me in my career. I've been doing this 13 years. She's been doing it 2 years, and she's already smarter than me, which is crazy to me. So she just absorbs. She's like a sponge. She just gets it. So to answer your question, yes, junior devs could definitely be exceptional. It's a bit about aptitude. It's not about degrees, right? Like, I don't think it matters if you've gone to Harvard or Stanford to program. In fact, I once had an intern at a different job from MIT who I had to fire because he didn't do anything. He sort of took it for granted and assumed he was owed an internship. So I would definitely say that, junior devs, a dev of any level can be exceptional. It's really about the passion and the aptitude for coding and being given the opportunity. I like to say that ability is nothing without opportunity. If you're not given the opportunity to showcase that stuff, then you're not going to get a job. And so we try to provide that opportunity more fairly by offering a junior path into the company through the internship program. I think that's, are there any other questions I missed? No, I think that's all those questions. So I want to talk a bit about getting a job in technology. Like I said, whether or not Stack Overflow doesn't matter to me. Realistically, not everybody here is going to work at Stack Overflow, and you don't have to. And it's not the be all end all, and it's not the world's best place to work probably. There's probably better out there. But what you're interested in is how to get a job remotely in general. And I think that's a wonderful thing to do for yourself and your loved ones and just your life balance. It's really nice to not have to, get up and take that commute into work, especially when it's like rainy out or snowy or whatever. So In interviewing, like I said, I've interviewed about 100 people in the last couple of years. I see trends in good and bad, and I'm happy to share them with you. And like I said, worth the price charged. So, take it as an opinion, not as fact, and, take the parts of this that you like and discard the parts of it that you don't. The first thing that I see people kind of fail to do is create artifacts. So when I'm interviewing a candidate or when I'm screening them, like when I'm reading your resume, especially if you're junior. So if you don't have a ton of established work experience, which is fine and normal, everybody goes through it. I want to see things that are going to better my perception of you being successful. In other words, I want to see evidence. If I think about it logically and rationally, I want to see evidence that you're probably going to be doing okay. And since you haven't worked full time, it's really hard to say I've been doing this job for 2 years and it's great and everybody loves me and that's why I'll be successful. So what you do instead is you create artifacts that show me that you can succeed in things. Now, I want to put a caveat in here. Not everybody has the time to create a lot of artifacts, right? Some people have the luxury of spending their evenings coding open source and doing whatever. Other people have families to take care of and, second jobs and, other responsibilities, caring for their elderly parents or caring for children. That's normal. That doesn't, I would never hold that against you. And so when I say create artifacts, there's different ways to do that. One of them is to create, an open source solution or contribute to one. You can do that on GitHub. Find something that you're interested in and contribute to it a little bit. Take some of the issues at hand and jump in and try and solve them. You can also create something, right? Like hopefully, I would hope that that a lot of you have had a chance to create a project during your education. And in doing so, you would put it up on GitHub and make it visible to people. And that's something that I can look at as an artifact and see, okay, like this is your coding style. I see that you're pretty active and you're coding a lot during the day. That's a good thing to see as well. You could do it via blogging. The main way that I contribute these days is blogging and twittering. Is it called tweeting? I don't know. Twittering, tweeting, whatever. I don't do a lot of OSS anymore because I got stuff to do in my life. I don't do a lot of GitHub work anymore. I used to. Don't have time anymore. Life happens. But, blogging is a great way that I can spend an hour a week and write something and, put it up there for people to read, and that's an artifact. I'm always excited when I see a candidate with a blog and I read through the blog and it's pretty recent and it's interesting stuff, maybe about what mistakes they've made or things they're learning. I think those are always great. Another way is conferences. Again, not everybody's going to have the means to go to conferences, but if you can attend conferences or even speak at them, I think that's a great way to create artifacts. And the easiest way is wherever you are in the world, there's probably a user group for a technology you're interested in. So if you're learning Ruby, for example, there's probably a Ruby on Rails user group somewhere in your town or nearby. Attend it, get to know people, shake hands, say hi, go to a couple of, presentations, put down on your resume that you attend this user group regularly and are a member of it. Those are things that show me that you have a passion for programming and that you're actively involved in bettering yourself. And those are really important to see, especially in juniors. Another thing is the fundamentals. So a lot of people fail our code screen step, which makes me sad. It's not I really don't want to sound condescending, but I'm probably going to because I'm bad at that. But it's not a particularly difficult problem. But what happens is a lot of people don't actually know how to code. And the reason they get through their careers without knowing how to code is because they work at those places that don't code screen them. And they get a job there and kind of ride it out. So, the best thing you can do to get a leg up is to study and really know your data structures and algorithms, the core concepts.
When you say don't know how to code, can you be a bit more specific? Like, what are you looking at?
So basically the thing that we ask you to do as a code screen is something similar to FizzBuzz, if you've ever heard of that question. So the problem statement is, write a loop for 1 to 100. If the number that you're outputting is a multiple of 3, write fizz. If it's a multiple of 5, write buzz. If it's a multiple of 3 and 5, write fizzbuzz. And if it's anything else, just output the number. So you're going to end up writing a for loop and some if statements in whatever language you like. I have seen at least a few dozen people who can't write a for loop at all. And yet they've been in the industry for 5 or 10 years. It's totally baffling. But what it is they work at those places where they don't get code tested and they're able to kind of talk their way through instead of code their way through. And that's why I strongly recommend only working at places that code test you as part of the interview process. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. Kevin asks how. It's a great question, Kevin. I don't know. It's amazing. But people, the best leg up you can have. There's a thing that I went through that I see a lot of people go through, which is when you first get in the field, you're a little bit insecure about your skills because you don't have anybody to compare yourself to, and you haven't interviewed anybody because you're not an interviewing manager, and so you just assume that everybody's better than you. And this is especially true if you're a woman or person of color who's already marginalized as it is in society, let's be honest. And so suddenly you're really feeling like you have no chance and you're not any good and everybody else is better. But if you want to get a real leg up on these people and kick their butts, all you have to do is understand how your basic data structures and algorithms work. It's totally amazing. Tons of developers have no idea how to code. And if you take the time, I'm not talking about stupid trivia like red black trees. I don't even know how to use a red black tree. I don't care. I'm never going to use it in my job. You're never going to use it. And the reality is, if you are going to use it, you'll Google it and you'll read about it and you'll figure it out. That's not the point. The point is, understand the core structures, understand what a list is for versus an array, understand, when to use a hash table or hash map and why that's valuable. Understand, it doesn't have to be a red black tree, but understand when a tree is useful. There's some times when a tree is an excellent data structure, usually when you're sorting and searching for things, and that's an important thing to understand and know how to create. Understand some of the sort of idiosyncrasies of languages, like Unicode is more expensive than ASCII, and understand that when you store that in a database, for example, you're taking up twice the space because Unicode is 2 bytes per character and ASCII is 1. It's a small thing, but it makes a huge difference if you imagine people, putting their first name and last name into your application 100,000 times. You'll take up double the space. So having a really robust fundamental understanding of the data structures and algorithms that are basics, and the basic commands like for loops, while loops, reference versus value types, being able to create if statements and case statements, all of that will put you miles ahead of tons of people, believe it or not. And you'll find that when you interview. It'll make you more confident too. So that's something I highly recommend. Definitely buff up on your data structures and algorithms, and schools such as this are going to be really good at doing that as well. Microverse is definitely something that focuses on the fundamentals of programming, so it's a good place to pick up those as well. This one's mostly for the men in the room. Don't exaggerate. So I see a lot of people. I see women in general, people who identify as women, they tend to undersell themselves. They put a resume out that's kind of meek or doesn't really boast about themselves. And that's okay. I think you could do more boasting. But with men, oh my God. I see resumes where I had one the other day. I'm not going to name names, of course, but there was a guy who applied and interviewed with us who had never really worked a job, but said he was an expert in C#. And I said, great, let's ask some C# questions. And he couldn't get through any of them. Just had no idea. But he's an expert in his own mind. So try to avoid, I know it's resumes are kind of like selling yourself, but there's a fine line between highlighting your strengths and just completely making stuff up and making yourself sound better than you are on paper. Any good company is going to see right through that. And what I really appreciate is when people are very honest about, what they know and don't know. I like seeing people rate themselves a 6 out of 10 on their programming language, and when I ask them about it, they say, I've always got more to learn and I'm still kind of figuring it out, but I've got a pretty good grasp. That's a good answer. Definitely don't exaggerate, and men tend to be very prone to that. I also think you should highlight tech and soft skills. So there's a small group of people that tend to take programming as a very logical thing. The code is the only thing that matters. The code is what's right, and people are just a byproduct, and it's too bad if I upset them. That's not the case. That's going to stunt your career big time. Programming and being a developer is just as much about code as it is about people, and the best programmers and developers are really good at soft skills. So that's something to be good at. If you're already good at it, that's awesome. If not, it's something to think about and kind of be introspective about. Make sure that you get along with other people and you can work with other people and you're not condescending and you're not berating and you're not insulting. Something to highlight on your resume or your CV is to identify your people skills and showcase how you get along with others. You can do that through I worked on this group project and I was this role in it and we had a bunch of arguments and I helped solve them. You can do it through, local organizations. You might put on your resume that you're part of the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts of America. Are they called Girl Scouts? I don't know. I'm not American. It's my excuse. But, if you're part of a local organization that involves working with people, that's a great thing to put on your resume. And it shows me and other managers that, you've cultivated some soft skills. The worst developers, and you've probably all met them, are the jerks that, are super brilliant, but also like super jerks. And they think that they can kind of skim through it because even though they're jerks, they're super brilliant, and so you're going to keep them hired. I fire those people. You don't need to work with them, and they have a lot to learn about interacting with other people. And so soft skills are a very important thing to cultivate and recognize as part of your skill set as a developer, especially remotely, where soft skills are even more important because, like I talked about, you got to be really communicative. The other one is to put yourself out there. So Wayne Gretzky, I'm a hockey fan, I'm from Canada. Wayne Gretzky has a quote that says something like, "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take." And that's totally true. So, don't fear rejection. You're not going to get every job you apply for. When I first moved to America, I was on a visa and my job sucked and I wanted to get a different job. And I probably got rejected 60 places straight over about 8 months. I just got rejection after rejection after rejection after rejection until finally a recruiter called me, and it ended up working out to be a job at Fanatics where they were willing to hire me and work with my visa, which was totally awesome. But I had to work at it. I mean, what was my success rate? 1 in 60? 1 in 61? Like, that's terrible. But you have to put yourself out there. I wouldn't have got that job if I didn't get myself out there and try to get hired. So don't be afraid to be proactive. Reach out to hiring managers, reach out to HR people, send your resume everywhere and anywhere that you're interested in working. When you do create a resume and send it somewhere, take the time to write a reasonable cover letter. It doesn't have to be like an essay, but write a couple paragraphs about why you specifically want to work at that company. That's something that also really makes you stand out. The number of generic, like, "Dear hiring manager, I am applying for the position of full stack developer." Like, those are horrible. The minute I read that, I roll my eyes. So, if you write something that says like, "Oh, yeah, I use Stack Overflow all the time," it'd be awesome to be on the other side of it making it. For example, if you're applying with us, or maybe you're applying with Amazon, you're like, "I'm always sending random crap to my door when I've been drinking at 2 a.m. and ordering stuff." And I would just, I would just love to work there and be part of that. Like, any of that will make you stand out big time, for sure.
Thanks, Paul. I hope that answers what you were asking. If there's anything else missing, please comment. And yeah, carry on, David. Thank you.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I totally missed some questions. Sorry. A question from Paul.
Yeah,
Is there a way to put everything on one's resume? Would you be able to provide a rough list of things that I think are best to see? Yeah, I'll get to that in just a minute. I have just a couple more points, and we'll go to Q&A. The other point I have out there is be yourself. So you don't want to work where you're not comfortable being yourself. So make sure that you relax, you take it easy, be who you are. It's good to bring your whole self to work. In the interview process, be yourself. And if you're not comfortable, don't work there, right? If you can afford to not work there, or work there and then find a better job quickly. But definitely try to find a place where you feel comfortable at work. It's really important to your happiness, and it's really easy to suffer from things like depression and stuff, especially working remotely if you just sit in your house all day and hate your job. So it's an important thing to be yourself and be proud of it. Another thing is get the jitters out. So interviews are intimidating until you've done a bunch of them. I've done so many of them that I just don't get nervous anymore. I've like built armor or something, and you will too. But the way you get there is to do a bunch of interviews. And if you don't want to kind of do it live and screw up a couple times, do them with your peers or friends. Find a couple people that you trust and do an interview with them in the tech industry. Reach out to them and ask them if they'd be willing to do a mock interview, and just get the nerves out, go through it, kind of get a feel for it. And if you screw up there, there's no harm, no foul, because you're not getting hired anyway. But it's a good way to kind of do a dry run before the real thing. And to the last point, which is also kind of Paul's point, highlight successful projects. So don't just show me your work history, especially if you don't have much work history. Create talking points for the manager via recent projects you've completed on GitHub or other public spaces. That's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. I'll jump right into Q&A. So Paul says, there's no way to put everything on one's resume. Would you be able to provide a rough list of things you think are best to see or most impactful in a junior resume, and the least most important, least impactful to have on a junior resume? Yes. The least useful thing is a mission statement. I always hate to read a paragraph of, "I am looking for a job to better my skills in the industry of technology." It's like, no kidding. That's why you applied. That's totally superfluous. I would ditch it personally. What I like to see is your name or not, whatever you want to put on there, your phone number, contact info. I like to see a skills list. What are the tech skills that you have? List them out. And if you really feel confident, grade yourself on them. Don't give yourself 10 out of 10 on anything. I wouldn't either. It's just there's always something to learn. List your soft skills. So not just tech stuff, like maybe you're like Ruby on Rails, MongoDB, whatever. Then you list your soft skills, able to solve and diffuse conflicts, works well with others, team player, yada, yada. Maybe rate yourself on those as well. I think those are useful. Give me at most the last 2 or 3 jobs. If you're applying and you haven't really been in tech, that's fine. List some of the internships you've had, if you've had internships. If you haven't, I would list a couple of the jobs you had in your prior field, such as maybe it's finance or marketing, for example, just so that people know that you've worked in the past and it's not just a big unknown gap. And when you write them down, don't focus on the marketing aspects or the finance aspects. Focus on the teamwork aspects. Like, I worked on projects with people and got stuff done, because that's the stuff from your other career that's going to transfer over to programming. I also like to see projects. Try and put at least 1 or 2 or 3 projects. Hopefully Microverse has got you building things together. Put those projects on your resume, and don't just write the name of it and 1-sentence explanation of what it does, because that's what I see a lot. Write down the name of it, write down the explanation of what it does, write down what you did in it and your role, and write down the outcome of it, like what it was and how it went and how long it lasted, and that you got it done. That's really important. And then I like to see hobbies, honestly. I think that if you really want to kind of sometimes get lucky, you can play the lottery of hobbies. Put a couple of hobbies down on your resume at the end, and you might find that a hiring manager is just as into rock climbing as you are, and suddenly you're having a really fun conversation for the first 10 minutes that kind of makes you feel relaxed, and they're already sort of more amicable to you than they would be otherwise. So in order, if I was going to build a resume, I would put skills, hard and soft, work experience, last 3 maximum, projects 1 to 3, at least 1, hobbies and or interests and or local groups like attending user groups and so on and so forth. Could be that you go to church on Sundays and run the light show or something. Anything like that is fine. That pretty much is what I would knock out a junior resume as. And you're making me think I should blog about a junior resume perhaps this week and put up a template on how I would do it.
Yeah, it was great info.
Cool. Josh asks, hopefully I can call you Josh. You don't really get to tell me whether or not I can, so I'm going to assume that Josh is okay. Josh from Japan asks, having distributed teams, what sort of interaction do you have with other people at Stack outside your team? How are teams organized? That's a great question. So we do have a bunch of teams in the organization. Some are software, some are not. The teams are organized. That's a broad question. In engineering, we have product teams. We have 4 or 5 major products, and we have 4 or 5 teams, 1 for each product. Outside of it, we have like a marketing team, a couple of sales teams divided into sub-teams, stuff like that. Interaction with other people is accomplished a few ways. One is status meetings. Like, we work a lot with the product managers, and we go to meetings to plan stuff with them. We use Slack. Slack is a really great tool. It's not the only tool, but it's a great tool to have a remote workforce. So there's many chat rooms that we have on Slack, things like product manager's room and overall announcements room and that kind of thing, and marketing room. And we hop in there and hang out and ask questions if we need to, that kind of thing. Interactions outside of my team, they're somewhat minimized, to be honest with you. Most of what I do day in, day out is work with my team. But we try to facilitate them. I hate that word, but we do try to facilitate them through things like Slack. Those meetups, like I said, they might attend those meetups and be part of the group that gets to know each other in person, and just other options like the coffee bar, like I said. And we also have some other social activities. One's called Stack Roulette, which is a piece of software that once a month picks 3 random names from different organizations and puts them all together in an email and says, you're going to meet and talk for a half hour about anything, and this person's going to organize it of the 3. And that just forces you to meet people outside of your department and get to know other people in the company. And I think that's been really useful too. Hopefully that answers your question. It's hard to answer because it's a super broad question, but you have to work at communication, especially outside of your team when remotely. When working remotely, being more explicit is definitely key. Other questions? Let's see. There's one from, I'm going to butcher this name, I'm really sorry. I'm hoping it's Sophiane. Hopefully I'm close. Sophiane asks, hi David, what do you mean by an unknown gap in a career? So what I mean is, if I see your resume and you haven't really worked in programming or technology, but maybe you worked 5 years in healthcare, if you don't put that on your resume because you don't think it's relevant, then I see a resume that has no experience. And so I don't know, if you've worked in a professional environment at all, and that creates sort of uncertainty for me, like, how will you adapt to working in a professional environment? Will you be able to get along with other people? I'd much rather see experience that you've had previously, whether it's in school or, sorry, there's a thunderstorm here. I don't know if you can hear that. Whether it's in school or whether it's in another career, I would like to see a little bit of history of doing something before now, just to understand that you've interacted with other people, that you worked with other people, and that you're able to do that. I think that's an important part of sort of vetting people. And then no name, but rocket ship icon asks, if I am a junior developer, well, it just jumped, sorry. If I'm a junior developer, should I be applying to jobs asking for 2+ years of experience, or will it be a waste of time? I always think you should apply. Studies show that men will apply to jobs if they have a couple of the qualifications. Let's say a job has 10 requirements. You have to do this, and that. Men will apply if they have a couple of them. They'll be like, hold my beer, I can do this. Women won't apply unless they have all of them. What I encourage all of you to do is apply, because the waste of time in this case, your resume is already written, you're writing 10 minutes of cover letter, you send it out, the worst thing they do is say no. But if you don't apply, they say no anyway. My first job out of school was a 2+ years experience job that I applied to, and they interviewed me, and they said up front, like, it's going to be tough to hire you because you don't have the experience, but I killed the coding part, and they decided that I would be able to work there and gave me my first gig. So I definitely think it's worth applying to things that you're not fully qualified for. Let's see, what else do I have? I think that's all the questions I have right now.
Yeah.
Cool.
Any
right. Other?
We got 2 more.
Okay. Kyle asks, is it important to you that a resume be kept to a single page? No, but it is important to me that a resume does not span many, many pages. I once got a resume that was 16 pages long. I did not read it. Yeah, I did not read it. I did not care. At that point, I think that you don't know what you're doing. That's just crazy. It literally went back to 1981 in 2014. Like, I do not care what you were doing in 1981. They didn't have electric cars back then or anything. Like, it was a totally different time. Like, it's just totally insane. I think that the thing about a resume is that you keep it to a maintainable, readable, skimmable length. For me, that's 2 pages max. 1 page is good too. Think about it from the perspective of the manager. If I hand this to somebody, can they read over it in 5 minutes? If the answer is yes, then you're doing pretty good. If the answer is they basically have to read an essay because it's 16 pages long going back to 1981, no, that's not good. So I think single page is kind of a myth and a false belief, but I do think that no more than 2 pages is usually key. And it's okay to cut things out that don't matter. Like, I've had about 10 jobs, and I don't list the last 6 of them or 7 of them because they just don't matter anymore. But if people ask me about it in the interview, I can talk about them, on the fly. So that's not a big deal. And then another question is from Kevin. On automation, can anyone in the team deploy to staging or production, or is there an approver? At this point, anyone can apply or can deploy, to staging or production. That's not necessarily always good, because having an approver is definitely like a checkpoint or a gate that helps you not break the code. If you're new to the team and we've just hired you, the mentor will kind of be that approver for the first 6 weeks. They'll review your code with you and make sure it's good to push. But yeah, in the current state, anybody can build out at any time, and they just kind of have an etiquette where they check with other people first before they do it to make sure it's good to go. Other questions? I'm going to butcher this too. I'm sorry. Chibuzor, hopefully, or Chibuzor, asks, you talked about imposter syndrome earlier. Can you explain more about how to overcome this? That's a hard one. Imposter syndrome is a bugger because most people, self included, never really overcome it. I still have thoughts. I'm 12 years into my career or something, and I still have thoughts that I'm a big phony faking it till I make it, and one day everybody's going to finally figure it out and fire me. Like, that's just imposter syndrome. I think that kind of pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, being willing to apply to things you're not always qualified for, putting yourself out there, like I said, not fearing rejection. Those are ways to start to combat it. And then past that, I think you just need to give it time. The more experience you gain, the more confident you'll become. And the more confident you become, the less imposter syndrome will kind of factor into your life. But it is something that's real for virtually everybody. I will literally say with a straight face that everybody in this room has it completely, self-included. It's totally normal. Another way to overcome it is to see other people interview. It's really amazing. Like I said, you find, I think a lot of people are shocked that I've interviewed people who can't write a for loop, but like that's somewhat common, and you just assume the best of other people and assume that they're really skilled, but it's not always true. And so seeing the evidence that people out there aren't as good as you sometimes is helpful as well, as evil as that sounds. And then DeBargia asks, what can you say about career growth in remote jobs? It's a good question. Career growth depends on the company. Remote jobs and on-site jobs have the same problems. I think that part of your interview process where you're vetting the company is to kind of ask about what the career progression looks like. Like, what is the career track? Where am I going to be in 5 years? If I'm doing well. Having opportunities for advancement is important. If you don't have them, you're probably, if you're interested and motivated, you're probably going to go get them at a different job. So a good company is going to have a career progression track because they want to keep you employed and happy. Hopefully that answers your question. And then Josh asks, any particular approaches you think are effective for managing other engineers from remote locations? Yeah, I think asynchronous communication is key. So I've got people in Europe and they're done by now. It's 6 p.m. their time or 7 p.m. They're not working right now. But it's 1 p.m. my time. So just having an open and transparent communication channel where I can leave them notes and they can get them tomorrow morning, and then they can leave me notes and I can get to them when I get in. It's a good way to manage people remotely, especially when they're in different time zones. And I think that's all the questions.
Yeah, looks like it. I've been waiting because I don't want to take the conversation away from all these questions about landing a job and doing remote work and everything. But we had another. Perfect. Let me see. Well, Nicole says, I don't know if this is an issue for senior developers or not, but how do you deal with what I would call code attrition, forgetting things you once knew or suddenly not being able to do something you used to be good at? Typically, due to trying to keep up with the massive influx of new information in the field.
Yeah, I think the answer to that is tricky. Over time, you develop skills that kind of become staples and don't really decay. Like, I haven't really programmed full time in 3 years, but I still know how to write a for loop because I did it so much. Or at least I think I do. Should try it. But it's I think the thing is, when you're junior, you're kind of trying a little bit of everything to figure out what you like. And what typically happens in my eyes is you find an area that you're very excited about. It could be databases, it could be search engines, it could be caching, it could be websites, it could be full stack dev, it could be Node.js, it could be JavaScript and front end work with React. And once you find that, I think it's a good thing to specialize. So, don't worry about the stuff you're going to forget on the database side if it's not interesting to you. Become a really specialized front end developer, and that's something that's going to be in demand. Or if you're into databases, forget about the front end and become a really specialized database, developer and administrator, and that's going to be in demand. Or if you're really into the back end, forget about the front end and the database and worry a lot about your algorithms in the back end, and that's going to be in demand. So I think the answer to that is specializing and deliberately forgetting things that are no longer relevant to you as you go. But up front, just try to absorb it all like drinking from a fire hose and stay relevant. And once you find that thing that's interesting, you can kind of specialize from there.
A little bit on that note, are there any recent technologies that you're excited about? Anything you've seen recently that has caught your mind personally or as a manager?
I have found Go to be really interesting. I just converted my blog over to Hugo, which is a static site generator, and I was really impressed with how easy that was. And Go also, the compiler creates straight binaries. They run natively, so you don't need libraries. It's really interesting. It's a cool language from Google that I'm just starting to get into. Past that, the new .NET Core that's coming out, so it's a cross-platform version of .NET that'll run. You could compile code on Windows and then run it on Linux, for example. I think that's going to be really awesome, and we're starting to dive into that a little bit. And then just sort of battery technology, which is a random statement, I know, but battery technology is getting better, and I think we'll get to a point where it's finally good enough that we can run solar batteries for our homes and cars and stuff like that, and that's going to be really cool. And I think that'll hit in the next 20 years or so, personally.
Hopefully.
Yeah, totally. I'm done with oil. Yeah.
I think there's one more from Joshua. Are biticles at a Stack Overflow always asynchronous?
No, so we schedule meetings and set up a time for a call, but you can also start one at any time ad hoc. So if you're getting into a conversation, a lot of times it's hard to convey a lot of stuff in text. I think Nicole said earlier, like typing things takes forever, right? If you got to type a ton of stuff out. that's when you realize, hey, this would be better to do in voice and just start a hangout and say, come join me in here and let's talk about it. So we do both.
Cool, thank you. Well, in the meantime, I'm going to take the conversation a little bit away from the current topic. I was very interested in what you mentioned, these projects for making the interaction with the Stack Overflow a bit easier or smoother for people that are just coming for the first time. I found it really difficult, like trying to answer a question. It can be really intimidating, and oh my god, Stack Overflow has saved me so many times for any kind of problem. So I don't know if it's a question per se, but any kind of recommendations on how to approach Stack Overflow for the first time trying to contribute or stuff like that?
It's hard. I think it's something that we owe you and not something that I can give you advice on. It's something we're doing badly. Our blog is currently running a series of things we're doing called the Welcome Wagon to make things better. Let me see if I can get a link to it real quick. Yeah, here it is. This post is a really good sort of breakdown of the issues we've identified and what we're doing to solve them and things that, do and don't work well for people on Stack Overflow as new users. I'm just putting the link in the text now. So I think that's a good read to answer your question. It's probably better than any explanation I could give you right now. It's very thorough.
It's perfect, and to all the people filling the Wikipedia pages and answering the Stack Overflow's questions, thank you very much for that work.
Yeah, no kidding. I always joke that it's the first AI because we created Stack Overflow, but then we need to code it and we get stuck. So then we use Stack Overflow to get the answer, and then we put that code in Stack Overflow. So it just keeps building itself. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, these people are carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. And
yeah, exactly. It's wild.
You haven't met them. Yeah, it's crazy.
It's wild. Cool. I think that's about time.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. If there are no more questions, Nicole was asking for information on the Stack Overflow internship. So if you can post that on the chat, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll try and find. I don't know if it's published yet. It's the hard part, but I'll try and find it if I can.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's not posted yet, unfortunately. So I don't have a link for you right now. But it's something that I would say, look out for on our Work Here page. It's very likely going to go live in the next couple of weeks. And that's going to be for internship opportunities. And I'll put a link to that here.
Perfect. I think there's one more comment in the chat. Oh, it's your link. Yep. All right, there are no more questions. David, thank you very much for what I would call a big insight on remote work and applying for first jobs and pretty much like the state of applying for a career in tech. It was like I said, I think it was a great insight, and thank you very much for taking the time to giving all these topics. I don't know if you also want to share. You mentioned your blog or any kind of personal thing you want to share before we leave.
Sure. Yeah, I have a blog at haneycodes.net. Feel free to peruse it. It's not terribly exciting all the time, but I try to keep it somewhat. I lapsed last year, but I'm trying to get back into it. So feel free to give it a read. It might inspire you to create your own blog. Who knows? But thank you for having me. Thank you all for attending. It was super fun to chat with you. Alvaro, thank you for hosting. Totally appreciate it. And thanks again for inviting me.
You have been a great guest speaker. Thank you very much. And to all our attendees, thank you for joining this week's Launch and Learn. If you're interested in Microverse, please visit microverse.org. And also, if you want to join, there's the apply button. So totally click that. We actually have many of the things that David mentioned, like from our program. We have 1 hour dedicated to working on algorithms and these kind of problems, like the FizzBuzz problem that David mentioned. So totally worth checking it out. And again, thank you very much, David, and all the attendees for coming.
Thank you all, and have a really good rest of your day and a safe 4th of July if that's the thing you celebrate.
Thank you.
Thanks again. See you all later. Bye.